Hello, welcome to our program called The Psychic and the Pastor. Well, we're not going to be talking about to a psychic today. We're talking about somebody who used to be an astrologer, well-known astrologer by the name of Marcia Montenegro. Welcome, Marcia.
Hello, Pastor Kent. It's just great being on the program with you. Thank you.
And we're going to be looking at a book that you co-wrote with Dawn and Joy Venot. And it's a book called Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret. That's what we're going to do. This is this program, and the program after this, we're going to be talking about your astrology work, okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be following this now. Enneagram is how I pronounce it, but it's spelled Enneagram. And right now, we're hoping that we're going to put an image of that Enneagram up so the people watching the program can see it. There it is. It's these 9-point things, a circle with a triangle in the middle and other lines. And we're going to talk about that, what that is. And so it's a symbol for a geometric design, and it's used, what's it used for, Marcia?
Well, the way it's being used now in the church, which is not the original way and not the way it's supposed to be used, is as a personality assessment tool, although it's being promoted with a lot of spiritual claims, such as will help you in your marriage. It will help pastors with their team. It will help you in leadership positions. It will help you grow closer to God. It's used in discipleship. It's used for prayer. It's used in devotionals. It's just kind of mushroomed out into all areas.
Okay. And it's, would you call it fortune telling?
Well, I wouldn't call it fortune telling exactly, but the way it came about is through what might be called fortune telling because it involved spirit contact.
Okay. Spirit contact.
Right.
Now, the origins of the Enneagram, I think, Marcia, let's talk about a little bit. I have some notes here. There's going to be a chapter in my book called Enneagram, but some people claim it goes back into ancient days, thousands of years old, but that claim is not accurate. And the way historically it developed by a man named George Gurdjieff, who lived from 1866 to 1949. He was a famous sort of occult-oriented Eastern mysticism writer, very well known at a period of time. And his followers claimed that an Enneagram came from a secret Sufi brotherhood.
Right.
The Sufi brotherhood, that's an offshoot, it's a kind of a denomination or spin-off of Islam, the Sufis.
Right, it's like a mystical spin-off.
Mystical spin-off, and it said it's come to that, and then later on P.D. Ouspensky, one of the famous names in mystical kinds of occult practices, he accepted Gurdjieff's ideas, but he expanded it. He called it the fourth way. It kind of evolved from there. Various people grabbed a hold of it and publicized it, especially Claudio Naranjo.
Right.
And so they based it. What do you know about that, Marcia?
Well, yes, what you said about Gurdjieff is very true. And he devised the Enneagram that we see today as a map of the cosmic universe. He thought you could fit all the laws and everything about the universe could be explained in the Enneagram. And
right.
so that's the way he taught it. And it was a tool of awakening. Gurdjieff was, this teacher who said we're all asleep. We have to awaken to the truth, and we have to awaken to what he called the new man. And of course, this was a process you went through with his teachings, typical occult esoteric type teachings. Uspensky, as you said, was his student. He's the one who wrote about the Enneagram because Gurdjieff did not. And so for a while, the only people who knew about the Enneagram or had anything to do with it were the followers of Gurdjieff and Uspensky. Then a man named Oscar Ichazo from Bolivia picked it up in the 1960s and started teaching it at his occult school in Chile.
That Ichazo, Ichazo, from Arica, Chile. And he had kind of an occult-oriented group down there.
Yes.
And he dealt with it. And Claudio Naranjo, he learned it from Ichazo. And
yes, he did.
It kind of just about. Now, where it really went wild was it got to the Esalen Institute at Big Sur, California in the 1960s, and it exploded across America.
Well, yes, it did. It got picked up. Claudio Naranjo went to Esalen, which was a very edgy place where there were people experimenting around with psychology and spirituality and all kinds of ideas. There were lots of some of the early New Agers were there, and there was an influence on the human potential movement and the New Age from Esalen. And yes. Naranjo was there, and the Enneagram went out into two different directions from there. One direction was into a Roman Catholic seminary in Chicago, and that happened via a man named Bob Oakes, yes. O-C-H-S.
Yes, Bob Oakes.
He took the teaching into that seminary where several Roman Catholic priests learned it. And that's how it got into the church, although the Roman Catholic Church never validated or endorsed it.
They did not endorse it at all, no.
No. And the first, articles against it came from Roman Catholics. And the other direction it went in was the New Age. And that was via a woman who is still alive and very influential, because most of these people have died, although Naranjo and Ichazo only died in the last 2 or 3 years. It's very recently.
Yeah.
Helen Palmer, who at the time was a psychic, took it into the New Age. And she started talking about it. She wrote a book. She got students who were interested. It spread into the New Age just like wildfire, because the Enneagram is the perfect New Age tool. It is the perfect New Age tool. And I'm not surprised at all it did so well in the New Age. I actually heard about it when I was in the New Age. I didn't really know too much about it. What I heard I didn't think was very interesting. And since I was an astrologer and I found astrology much more fascinating, I didn't follow up on it. And so it grew and developed in the New Age. And a lot of the books that came out on the Enneagram were written by New Agers. So that went on for a while. In the 90s, a few secular corporations, found out about it and decided they would use it as a tool, the same ways that the Myers-Briggs is sometimes used by companies. And so it was used that way. I don't know how popular it was. I don't think it was wildly popular, but I think it was used. And then, from there, you had it suddenly appearing in among the progressive Christians.
Yes, exactly right. Among the progressive Christians. And that's one of my disappointing experiences was that Zondervan Publishing House got involved in publishing material as well as InterVarsity. But Zondervan, they published my first book that I wrote that was published in 1973. It was Zondervan.
Really?
And I loved Zondervan. They took me to the big conferences and I signed the book. And I was very saddened to see these historic Christian publishers began to print books in this area. One of the people I think that was so very largely responsible for moving this into the progressive areas was Richard Rohr.
Right, exactly.
R-O-H-R, Richard Rohr, Franciscan.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And he's still around today, isn't he?
Oh, yes. He is still around. I think he's still writing his blog. He's still doing some interviews. He's, his Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque is going strong because a lot of people who became his followers actually, are running it, and they're doing, there's a podcast that's done from there that 2 younger people are directing, and then he has people coming and teaching there. So it's a very, very active, busy place that attracts a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah, it's extremely influential.
It is. It is indeed. Let me ask this, and it's a very hard question. What kind of people do operate the Enneagram? First of all, Marcia, do they go through a training process to learn how to do this?
You can teach yourself if you get some of the books that claim to tell you about it and teach you about it. Now, if you want to be a teacher, then unfortunately now in the evangelical church, there are certifications and training programs set up by Christians who have become adherents of the Enneagram. And you can go and of course, you pay money for this, and you pay money to get certified, and then you're an Enneagram coach or an Enneagram teacher, and then you can go to your church and teach it and teach people how to use it. So that's one way it's spreading, is because there are these training programs for people to teach it. It's not just here's how you individually can learn it, but here's how you can pass it on. And I feel like we skipped a step there. I want to mention that Rohr and because of his influence with the progressives, like Rob Bell and Brian McLaren and Tony Jones and some others, they got interested in the Enneagram and started talking about it at their conferences. And I noticed that, and that's why my first article on the Enneagram was 2011, which is on my website, called The Enneagram GPS, Gnostic Path to the Self. And I wrote in that article about 2 Christians who were somewhat had prominent positions who were using it, one of whom was Suzanne Stabile. And then I kind of just, I didn't forget about it, but I didn't really think anything was going to happen. But it started getting into the evangelical church, especially in 2016, when The Road Back to You was published by IVP. And that was written by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. And Stabile was mentored by Richard Rohr. So that was really kind of when the door was opened really wide, and because it gave it credibility that IVP published it, and they promoted it very heavily. I think the authors went on tours around, the country talking about it. And so some people were very fascinated and thought, well, I never heard of this. And they were giving this false history that it's ancient. And sometimes they would say it has Christian origins. It was used by the Desert Fathers and Mothers. That was a very common claim.
Yes, the Desert Fathers. And it was not, of course.
No. The first time it existed was 1916.
That's right. Yes, that's right. 1916. It had its beginning. Let me ask you this question. Well, there was a famous church down in Southern California that I understood adopted this as well, or taught it at some period.
Sandals Church with Pastor Matt Brown. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
He was one of the early promoters, and he did a 9-part sermon each Sunday doing a different type.
Okay.
And then he later wrote a book called, I think it's the book of you, or the book about you, about the Enneagram.
Okay. And how can we describe the danger of it or the
Okay.
non-Christian part of it. Marcia,
Yes.
how do you see that?
Yes, we definitely need to say that because we haven't yet. So the way that it was taught by Naranjo and Ichazo was that the 9 points there and the 9 types, and actually the word types wasn't used by Ichazo, are your false self. You have, because you've been conditioned by your experiences, by society, by your teachers, by your religion, to believe certain things, you've taken on a outward personality or persona that you think is you, and it's actually not you. And what's really bad about this, according to them, is that it's hiding the true self that's within you that you don't know about. And so there's a idea here that you need to dismantle this false persona and uncover this true self. Now that's kind of a very, brief summary of the ideas, which are much more, of course, esoteric and complicated. But that's the way it was really used. It was used as a tool to find the true self. And of course, this idea is it's a Gnostic idea. It's a New Age idea. It's not an idea compatible with Christianity, because we have the fallen self, the natural self, which is fallen and needs redemption through Christ. And then when we're redeemed, when we trust Christ, we have a new self in Christ. But that does not correspond to this false self, true self that they teach. Now, Richard Rohr kind of added a spin to it. He wrote a book called The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective, which came out around 1990-91. There was actually 2 or 3 editions of it. It first came out in German. And because it's called A Christian Perspective, a lot of people assumed, oh, the Enneagram can be used in a Christian way, or it's a Christian tool. But Richard Rohr is a follower of perennial wisdom, which means that he believes all religions come from the same root. They all share the same core, the same God. The fact that there's so many religions is a good thing. Perennialists don't believe that's bad, because they think that way each person can find their own path that's best suited for them. So whether it's Hinduism or Judaism or Islam or Christianity, you find the path that suits you, and then you may at some point come to the realization that there is this hidden true self, and you can uncover it. The true self for Rohr is the self that has never been separated from God, because he teaches we have never been separated from God. That is the view of perennial wisdom. God is in creation, and we are all part of God. So this idea is one of the beliefs of perennial wisdom. So there's kind of, just to sum it up, there's kind of like 3 different variations, or 4, on the Enneagram. There's the way Ichazo and Naranjo taught it. There's the way Richard Rohr teaches it. There's the way the Catholics taught it, which I think might have involved some Jungian psychologists who were Catholics and had a Jungian spin on it, which Richard Rohr does as well, because he likes Carl Jung. And then there's the New Age way. And then the New Age way would say we all have a divine self, and we have to come to terms with this outward personality that's false, and we have to find the true self. And then you have the other way, unfortunately, which is what the Christian church, the evangelicals, are using it, which is really confusing, because they're trying to make it Christian, and you can't make it Christian.
Yes, it's a real struggle, and a lot of double think in a lot of ways.
Yes, yes.
Departs from, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
Right.
That we have no spiritual capacity outside of Christ, that we have no other existence, and etc. And I can see the way Christians could get hooked into that stripped down version of Enneagram. It's kind of fun to play with. It sort of becomes a game. You talk about all of this weird stuff, you know.
Yeah, and everybody, you know, who gets into it, they start to think about, well, now I need to know my husband's number, and I want to know my children's number, and, you know, then they want to know their friends' numbers, and, you know, they get in these groups and they talk about, oh, you know, I'm a 4 too, and this is what I deal with, and it really takes over. It takes over because we are naturally self-oriented, and we find ourselves fascinating. Yeah. And so the Enneagram just fuels that.
Yes. And, you know, it's very, very similar to astrology.
Yes.
It's very similar to astrology, which is our next program we're going to be talking about, Marcia. It's identifying, oh, I'm a this, I'm a Cancer, I'm a Leo,
right.
I'm a this, and so this is how I am, and this is what I pay attention to. And the Enneagram is a similar. You find your numbers, 1 to 9 to start with, and what numbers you connect with. And you might be 2 numbers, you might be 3 numbers, and you accept this as who you are.
Right.
This is who I am.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
the Enneagram teaches that this is who you are for life.
Yes.
And this is actually, psychology teaches when they discuss anything about personality. And by the way, the Enneagram is not psychologically valid. It has no support from any credible psychological source, and in fact has been debunked by a Christian psychologist named Jay Medenwald, whom we quote in our book. It does not pass something called the psychometric test, and a lot of Christians have told me they can tell it's invalid because the categories overlap too much and they're too vague. But, you know, so it's not even valid for anybody, actually. And so it's not a valid tool, but it has this fascination to it, like astrology, and people think that it's real because when they use it, they're using confirmation bias and self-deception, self-validation, something called the Barnum effect, where certain things are described that would describe a lot of people, and so you think it's you. So all of these factors that cause people to believe the Enneagram is valid are the same factors that make people think astrology is valid.
Yes, it's so very, very much the same, and so you are the perfect person, Marcia, to engage in this book. How do you see the Enneagram right now in our day here, 2022? Do you still see it advancing in evangelical Christianity?
Unfortunately, I do. You know, it started with that first book in 2016. Then it took about a year for the second book to come out, which was The Sacred Enneagram by Christopher Horitz from Zondervan. Horitz, by the way, was also mentored by Richard Rohr. So the first 2 books have authors who were mentored by Rohr. And I did talk about Rohr's perennial philosophy, but I just want to say that Rohr has major heresies in his theology, such as making a distinction between Jesus and what he calls the universal Christ.
Yes.
So there's a distinction between Jesus and Christ. And he also talks about the first incarnation of Jesus was creation. And Jesus did not die for sins because personal sins don't really bother God. What bothers God are corporate sins. So that's just a little bit of Rohr's theology, just so people understand that this is very serious. It's not like he just has one erroneous idea. He is teaching major heresies that are completely out of line with the historic Christian faith. So that is why the fact that Rohr has such an influence is so dangerous. So what I've noticed is from those first 2 books, Don Vino, one of my co-authors, Don Vino, and I, he actually was keeping count of the books coming out. And he finally gave up, I think maybe a year or so ago, because he couldn't keep up anymore. And somebody said they did a count and found 90 titles from evangelical publishers. And that's partly because, for example, Beth McCord wrote 12 books, one for each type. And IVP also put out a series of devotionals for each type. So if you're a 3, you get the devotional for the 3. And they have one for each type. Those were all edited by Suzanne Stabile, and they did a big conference on it the end of last year. So IVP is still pushing it strongly. In fact, IVP now has a page that is dedicated to the Enneagram. And they said, we decided we needed to set up a central location where people could come to see the teachers and books on the Enneagram that they could consult to find out more about it. So I did a Facebook post on it because I was so astounded that they did this. So it actually seems to be growing, not letting up.
I'm afraid you're right, Marcia. So we have, instead of getting your Bible out and going through the Gospel of Matthew, or reading some of the Psalms, learning the story of Jesus and the story of the cross, they're concerned about their personalities and how special they are and how unique and different they are, and I suppose how to even grow more of that. Now, the one doctrine, we only got a little over a minute, one of the doctrine of Rohr's was that he is a panentheist.
Yes.
That everything is God. Everything is in God, and God is in everything.
Correct.
But I don't think that would play well in the evangelical movement. What do you think, Marcia?
Well, you wouldn't think so, but I have found that a lot of people are not bothered by it, and they misinterpret the same verses that Rohr uses to support panentheism, where it says all is in Christ or something. And actually, that passage is talking about how everything will come under his headship. Everything will come under Christ. And it doesn't mean literally that everything is in Christ as though we're all a part of Christ. So what happens is that there is a lack of maybe teaching good Bible hermeneutics and understanding these passages that are being misused. So I think a lot of people don't know what panentheism is, and they just aren't that bothered by it, or they don't think it's that serious an error. So I think I've run into that problem because I've done some writing on it, trying to explain it to people and why it's serious.
Well, Marcia, we've come to the end of the program. I'm so glad that you were able to say that, and we're able to deal with this. And I'm so happy for your ministry and your work. And I love talking to you. We're going to come right back, and we're going to do astrology. Wow.
Okay. Wow.
All right. Until the next program of The Psychic and the Pastor, be looking for more, and so long.